Welcome back. You're still with the Weekend Wake Up, and we're still talking books. We're with the bookworm Andrea van Wyk, who is the eNCA.com sub-editor, talking about her top reads for this month. So in case you're wondering what it is that you want to get your hands on to satiate your reading, well, she has a list to select from. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. I see the first book that we have here is Selling Lip Service by Tammy Baiki. It's a mouth wide open. I'm assuming it's something to do with a lot of talking. Yes,
well, so this is a really fascinating debut. She's the winner of the Non-Fiction Award. It's a dystopian speculative fiction genre. It's set in a world in which language becomes a commodity. So when you turn 18 in this world, you undergo this process where you have to start wearing this transdermal patch, like a plaster on your skin. You can no longer speak in your own voice. You have to speak through this thing. And these patches are designed by brands, by companies, and everything that you say is sort of an advertisement for this company while you speak. And the young woman who's the protagonist, Frith, she's desperate to be able to speak in her own voice. She wants to rebel, so she can hear her own voice in her head, but the moment she speaks, she's talking in like advertising speak. It's a really fascinating book because Tammy Baiki explores the nature of language. So if you're fascinated with something like semiotics, this is really a great book. So for example, she uses a lot of portmanteau, which is, you know, when you combine two words like mansplaining or bromance or shopaholic, and she really explores things like that. She explores the nature of language and commodification and brand culture that we have today. I think it's really, really interesting read. Yeah,
it does sound pretty interesting, especially with the messages that we're constantly bombarded with. Social media, television, radio, wherever we go, brands are constantly trying to speak through us, and we're finding ourselves muted more and more. So I'm looking forward to dipping into that. What's the next book that you think we must read this month?
So something quite different, non-fiction. Richard Dawkins, our legendary biologist and contrarian, nice controversial. This is a collection of some of his speeches and essays and articles that he's written over the past decade or so. What's great about it is that because they're essays, you can dip in and out of them. You can read one now, and in 2 months' time you can pick it up again. So it's something that you can read over a period of time. What's really interesting and great about Richard Dawkins is the way that he writes. He is just such a great communicator. So I'm someone who's interested in science and I want to know more about science, but I don't have a science background. And he writes for the lay person, but not in a way in which he dumbs things down at all, ever. He's always accurate, and any scientist can pick that book up and agree with what he's writing or the way that he's writing. It's just that he's able to write about science in prose. So there aren't any mathematical equations. I don't know if you've ever tried to read, you know, the best-selling book by Stephen Hawking, A Brief History of Time. I got about 10 pages in because these equations, I was just like, no, this is
So is this one of those books where I take it and read it in, you know, in chunks? So take it, reflect, you know, understand, and then go back to it, because it's quite a thick book.
Yes, and it's a wide variety of topics. So, you know, science in the soul. Of course, Richard Dawkins is quite a well-known atheist, so he doesn't believe in souls in a religious sense. He believes in the soul as something that's identity, and that's something that he explores across the book. But it's various topics, really interesting, and anybody who likes science and wants to know more about science but wants to read something you know, that's easy to understand, this is a great book.
Okay, great. Now the next book that we have here is The Goddess of Amara. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, and other stories. Just tell us a bit about why this book features on this list.
So it's a book of short stories. It's all the entries and the shortlist for the Kane Prize for African Writing. It's an annual event or competition. and every year they print this book or publish this book with all the stories in. And you were just talking about literature on the continent. And so these stories are from across the continent. You've got stories from South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Somalia, and the person who won this year is from Sudan. His name is Bushra Al-Fadil, and the story is called The Story of the Girl Whose Birds Flew Away. It was actually written in Arabic and then translated into English, so the author had to share the prize with the translator. But what a lovely story. The first thing I noticed about it was it's so lyrical. It read like almost like slam poetry, like music. And as we move through the story, you discover that the narrator is actually a poet who sees this beautiful woman in a market one day and follows her because her walk is like music, like rhythm.
Sounds like one you just
really
can't
beautiful.
put down.
And you can also have just dip in and out.
Rush and get our next and final book for this month. It's A Drain on Our Dignity. What's that about?
So this is a photography book. Photographer Masikole Feni. I hadn't actually heard about him before the publisher sent me this book. So The Drain on Our Dignity refers to the lack of sanitation in the townships around Cape Town. These are slice of life images of people who live in these communities, and basically about one of our biggest failures of society in which we do not treat the poor with dignity. And yet, even though these images are haunting and you know, really difficult to look at, they're also beautiful in an artistic sense, in the way that light is used and perspective is used. So I actually think this would make a great Christmas gift, a lovely coffee table.
And on that note, you're getting ideas not only on books but also on gifts to buy this Christmas. That's where we're going to have to leave it with Andrea for now. We'll be back with more news and views after this short break. Stay with us.